Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping right into some pretty intense discussions happening around the presidency. We've got this great mix of sources you shared, YouTube transcripts, different news outlets, various viewpoints on media stuff, political moves, and what people seem to be concerned about.
Exactly. And the range is, well, it's broad. We've got material from Fox News, Newsmax, but also The Intercept, Trish Regan, Megyn Kelly, Fox Business, The Daily Signal, John Anderson Media. So, yeah, quite a spectrum.
So our mission today really is to try and cut through some of that noise, right? Pinpoint the core debates,
Yeah.
lay out the different takes we're seeing in these sources, and maybe figure out what it all means for, the political climate right now.
And just to be clear, this is all based only on the material provided. We're just exploring what's being said.
Right. A factual exploration. Okay, so let's get into it. First up, this intense scrutiny on President Biden's presidency is really prominent in the sources.
Yeah, definitely. There's a new book out that's causing quite a stir. Fox News reported on The View, where the co-hosts were, well, concerned. Their worry seemed to be that focusing on Biden's past distracts from Trump.
Ah, okay. A strategic sort of political angle there.
Right. But then you've got Joe Concha, who you see on Fox News, and he has a totally different read. He sees the book as potentially highlighting what he calls a failed cover-up about Biden's cognitive state.
Wow, okay. So same book, two very different interpretations.
Exactly. And Concha, he even brings up, Nancy Pelosi's comments from the past about Trump's brain, suggesting, well, maybe the same standard should apply now to Biden.
The comparison is interesting. And speaking of media figures, Jake Tapper, right, on Megyn Kelly's show, he seemed to be showing, some humility about how he covered Biden's acuity before.
Yeah, humility. And he actually acknowledged Laura Trump was right about some things she said back in 2020. That's quite a statement from someone like Tapper. A real shift, maybe.
It does feel like a shift. Does it suggest maybe the mainstream media is starting to look at this differently? Or at least acknowledging the concerns that were mostly in conservative media before?
It could suggest that, yeah.
Oh.
A potential reevaluation. But the scrutiny isn't just about cognitive perceptions. The Intercept, for instance, lists out specific alleged falsehoods from President Biden.
Oh, right. I saw that. What were some of those?
Well, they mention things like the claim of being arrested in South Africa, a story about a silver star, his statements on the Iraq War, his role in the civil rights movement, even stuff about his academic record. It's quite a detailed list.
And they compare it to Trump's alleged falsehoods.
They do, but their argument is basically, even if Trump faced similar claims, Biden's alleged misstatements are still significant. They're saying we need a consistent standard for truthfulness,
Makes sense. Okay, then there's this whole auto-pen thing that keeps popping up in Newsmax and Fox News clips.
Right, the allegation that maybe an auto pen was used to sign laws, even pardons, which naturally makes people wonder, well, how involved was he? Was he fully aware?
And Newt Gingrich was questioning that too, wasn't he? On Fox Business, who actually approved those pardons?
Exactly. And Trump apparently said he'd look into who signed border-related legislation. The Constitution says the president has to sign, so using an auto pen, well, it raises legal questions. Big ones, potentially.
Yeah, that could be serious. It feeds into this narrative of questioning his authority, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And it's not just about signing things. Jake Tapper's book, again, according to Fox News reports, claims Biden is being sort of shielded from his cabinet.
Shielded. How so?
Well, claims of unnamed cabinet members worried about him, seeming disoriented, lacking confidence, especially in his last year. Which is interesting because Pete Buttigieg previously denied anything like that was happening.
Unnamed sources, but still coming from inside the cabinet, potentially. That adds another layer.
It does suggest the concerns aren't just coming from outside critics, right?
Okay, let's pivot a bit. Let's talk about this one big, beautiful bill and the dynamics it's showing within the Republican Party.
Right. So Speaker Mike Johnson on Newsmax basically said the goal is making the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent. And they're citing projections, from the Council of Economic Advisors, saying it could boost wages.
So potentially a big economic impact is the selling point.
That's the idea. And you've got Republicans like Senator Roger Marshall, also on Newsmax, who sounds really enthusiastic, talking about maybe $1,000 extra a month for Americans. He even had this baseball analogy. Trump is the closer to get it done.
Okay, so strong support there. But it's not unanimous, is it?
No, definitely not. Congressman Keith Self from the House Freedom Caucus, he was on Newsmax too, and he has some pretty serious concerns.
Like what, spending?
Yeah, spending is a big one. He wants more cuts, Medicaid, green energy subsidies, and he's worried about the national debt. So you clearly see this tension, this split within the GOP.
Between sort of the tax cut focus and the fiscal hawk wing.
Precisely. And it seems Trump himself went to Capitol Hill. Senator Marshall mentioned this, trying to negotiate, find a sweet spot, especially on tricky things like the SALT tax deduction.
The SALT tax. That always divides Republicans, doesn't it? Especially between high tax and low tax states.
It really does. It highlights those regional and ideological splits. And of course, we should mention Congressman McGovern called the bill ugly, so you can expect strong pushback from Democrats.
Okay, right. Let's shift again, this time to a local story that went national, the prison escape in New Orleans.
Yeah, quite a situation there. 10 inmates escaped, as reported on Newsmax. They've arrested a maintenance worker. Think he might have helped them. Last we heard, 5 inmates were still on the loose.
Which is obviously a huge public safety worry, and the details sounded pretty elaborate.
They did. Investigators seem pretty convinced it was an inside job, talking about shutting off water, removing a toilet, sawing through steel bars. It really suggests coordination, maybe help from inside.
And the worker they arrested, Sterling Williams, he says he was threatened.
That's his claim, yeah. So the full story is still, coming out. But Governor Landry, he's responded really strongly.
How so?
Well, he called it a case study in progressive failure. Blamed it on what he sees as being too soft on criminals. And he's criticized the sheriff, Susan Hetson, saying she's focused on progressive pet projects instead of basic safety.
So it's become very political very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And there are criticisms about how long it took to notify the public, especially since some escapees face serious charges like murder. It's raising bigger questions about accountability, security down there.
Yeah, you can see how that would fuel debates about criminal justice reform versus, public safety priorities.
Definitely. That political divide is pretty clear in the reactions.
Okay, let's head over to the West Coast now. California homelessness. There seems to be some new discussion, maybe because of Governor Newsom.
Yeah, Greg Gutfeld on Fox News was highlighting that Governor Newsom is now urging cities to ban homeless encampments. Gutfeld sees this as a big change from Newsom's previous stance.
And Gutfeld wasn't buying it.
Not really. He was pretty critical, suggesting it's not a real change of heart, but more about, the problem becoming so visible. He called it a man-made disaster, even compared it to Chernobyl. Quite strong language.
Wow. And others on Fox News agreed.
Seems so. Brian Kilmeade criticized Newsom's record overall, mayor, lieutenant governor, saying lots of money spent on homelessness, but things haven't improved. He also mentioned businesses leaving due to high taxes.
And Emily Compagno had a point about tourists.
Yeah, she suggested tourists giving money directly might actually be enabling the problem, in a way. So multiple criticisms hitting Newsom on this.
And is there speculation about why Newsom might be shifting his tone now?
Well, yeah. The analysis often points to potential presidential ambitions. Taking a tougher, maybe more centrist stance on a big issue like homelessness could be seen as, politically useful for a wider audience.
Right, the political calculation is always part of the conversation. Okay, let's move to something a bit more ideological. The criticisms of the woke agenda that came up in the sources.
Yes, Melanie Phillips on John Anderson Media had this really interesting analysis. She talked about a bizarre union of woke and jihad.
A bizarre union. How did she explain that?
Her argument basically is that even though their values seem totally different, these movements share a goal, destroying the West. And, she argues, a shared hatred of Jews. It's definitely a controversial take.
And she connects this to an inversion of reality.
Yeah, she sees this inversion in both progressive thinking and Islamist thinking. She also critiques what she calls Western liberal victim culture, saying it flips the script on who's the oppressor and who's the victim. It's a real challenge to how these things are usually understood.
And how does Israel fit into her analysis?
She argues that accusing Israel of genocide is a kind of projection. It lets parts of the liberal West feel morally good about themselves, she claims, even while overlooking or aligning with groups holding very different, sometimes opposing, values. It's a deep critique.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. Okay, let's switch focus again and look at how Donald Trump's approach is portrayed in these sources, often in contrast to the current administration.
Well, KT McFarland on Newsmax suggested Trump is very transparent. Like, what he says publicly is the same as what he says privately with world leaders. She contrasted that with what she sees as a lack of clarity or awareness from President Biden.
Okay, transparency is a key trait. What else?
Newt Gingrich, this time on Fox Business, praised Trump's knack for deal-making, quick deals. He used the example of meeting the Syrian president. Gingrich stressed Trump's focus was on getting investments for America, not just giving money away.
Right, the America First deal-making angle.
Exactly. And then you have Victor Davis Hanson writing for the Daily Signal. He has this very broad critique of current Democratic policies. He basically frames it as an experiment designed to weaken the U.S.
An experiment. How?
He points to damage he sees at the borders financially with the debt, and energy policy, and national unity, which he links to identity politics. It's a pretty sweeping criticism from his viewpoint.
And he laid out a specific strategy he thinks Democrats are using.
Yeah, he called it a 10-part strategy that's basically all about opposing Trump, whatever the cost. This includes, in his view, things like demonizing Trump and Musk, pushing for open borders, siding with radical Palestinian views over Israel, blocking spending cuts, pushing DEI hard, and generally creating chaos.
That's quite a list. And he also talked about oligarchs.
Yes. He finds it ironic that people call Trump and Musk supporters oligarchs, when, he argues, the Democratic Party has historically been closer to wealthy donors. He even notes some billionaires seem to be rethinking their Democratic ties recently. It's a counter-narrative, really.
Interesting. Okay, final big area then. The media's role in all this and these calls for accountability, especially regarding President Biden's fitness.
Yeah, this is definitely a theme. There seems to be growing acknowledgement, even in places like Politico, the New York Times, the Washington Post, according to references on Fox News, of a potential cover-up about concerns over Biden's cognitive health. The narrative seems to be shifting.
And that shift is bringing criticism onto figures like Jake Tapper.
Very much so. On Fox News, there were accusations that Tapper and others basically ignored or downplayed the issue for years, and now they're writing books about it, profiting from it. Even The View co-hosts apparently questioned his role.
But Tapper defended himself, right? We mentioned his humility earlier.
He did. On Megyn Kelly's show on Fox News, he expressed that humility, admitted conservative media might have been right earlier on this, but crucially, he denies being part of any deliberate cover-up. He's trying to walk a fine line there, it seems.
But despite his defense, the calls for accountability are getting louder, at least in some of the sources we looked at.
Yes, there's definitely a demand in some quarters for media outlets to answer for their past reporting, or maybe more accurately, their lack of reporting on this issue. It raises those big questions about journalistic integrity, potential bias,
Absolutely. It highlights that whole ongoing debate about media bias, doesn't it? How outlets cover or don't cover certain stories and what that means for informing the public.
Precisely.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive. We've really covered a lot of ground based on these sources you shared. Several key themes definitely stand out.
Yeah, the intense focus on President Biden, especially around media narratives and his capabilities, then the internal Republican debates, like with that tax bill, local issues becoming national flashpoints like New Orleans and California homelessness.
Right, and the ideological critiques, like the analysis of the woke agenda, plus the contrasting views on Trump's approach. And finally, this really significant thread about the media's role and accountability.
They're all kind of tangled together, aren't they, reflecting the current political moment.
Absolutely. And again, just to reiterate, everything we discussed came directly from that diverse range of sources you provided. We just laid out the different perspectives we found in there.
So as you, the listener, process all this, maybe think about your own role as someone who consumes media. What questions do these different takes raise for you about the information you see every day?
Yeah, what assumptions might be shaping how you understand things? And which narratives seem to be gaining traction out there in the public conversation? It's definitely something worth thinking about critically and maybe exploring more on your own.
It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world.